The night I curled up in the back of my old Ford Escape with nothing but a thin coat and a frozen window between me and the bitter Ohio winter, I finally realized what my daughter thought of me. I was nothing more than an inconvenience to her and her husband, a mouth to feed a bill to pay an eyesore in their perfect little lives. After the flood took my home, I went to them because I thought family was where you went when you had nowhere else, but all I got were tight smiles, cold notes, taped to the fridge, and a quiet shove out the door. I lay awake in that car, watching my breath fog the glass, and promised myself one thing. Someday I would stop letting people treat me like I didn't matter. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. My name is Carol, and I'm 64 years old. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where you know your neighbors and wave at strangers, where people say family is everything. I used to believe that too, right up until the day my own family made it perfectly clear I didn't really belong anymore. These days, I sleep in the back of my old Ford Escape. It's a faded blue with a heater that only works when it feels like it, and the seats don't recline the way they used to. Every night, I park in a quiet corner of a grocery store lot, bundle myself in my thickest coat, and pray the wind doesn't find a way through the cracks. Winter in Ohio is cruel, and when the temperature drops below freezing, the windows frost over so fast I can hardly see out. That's probably a blessing. It keeps me from looking at the homes all around me with their warm lights glowing behind curtains. This wasn't how I imagined my golden years. After the flood destroyed my little house last spring, Samantha told me not to worry. She said I could stay with her and Brad until I figured things out. At first, they were polite enough, but then the notes started showing up. Little slips of paper taped to the fridge about how high the utility bill was or how much extra I was costing them in groceries. At dinner, Brad would sigh and mention how tight money was since the baby was coming, and Samantha would just look at her plate. It didn't take long before I stopped feeling like a guest and started feeling like a burden. One morning, I woke up before anyone else and packed my things back into my car. There wasn't much. A few bags of clothes I'd salvaged from the flood, my purse, a box of photographs I couldn't bear to lose. Samantha didn't even walk me to the door. She just stayed in the kitchen feeding Emma oatmeal, telling me she hoped I'd be okay and that Brad was under a lot of pressure at work. I didn't say much that morning. I nodded, smiled, and told her not to worry. But as I sat behind the wheel and watched their house shrink in the rearview mirror, something in me cracked. I'd spent my whole life trying to be a good mother, a good grandmother, and in the end, my daughter couldn't even spare me a warm place to sleep. Now here I am, night after night in this car that smells faintly of wet wool and stale coffee, watching my breath hang in the air. I tell myself it's only temporary, that I'll figure something out soon. But deep down, I know better. Family is supposed to catch you when you fall. Mine just let me hit the ground. And the worst part is, they made it sound like it was my fault. Like I should have been grateful for the scraps they gave me. That's why I'm telling this story. Because people need to hear what happens when love starts to feel like a favor and family decides you're not worth the trouble anymore. The morning of the flood started quiet like any other. I remember making coffee and sitting by the kitchen window, watching the rain come down heavier than I'd seen in years. The weatherman had said we might get flash flooding, but in all my life, I'd never seen it that bad in our little town. By mid-morning, the water was up to my front steps, and by afternoon, it was pouring through the front door like a river. I tried to save what I could, shoving photo albums and keepsakes into garbage bags, lifting them onto the top shelves of the closet. The water rose faster than I could work. Soon, it was at my knees, then my waist, then higher still. I remember standing on the couch with my purse clutched in my hands, staring at everything I'd built, everything I loved, floating away. My mother's china set was smashed on the floor. The quilt she made for me as a wedding gift was soaked and torn. Even my wedding album was gone by the time the rescue boat came. They took me to the high school gym with the others who'd lost their homes. We sat on cots in a row, quiet and stunned, listening to the rain hammer the roof. The Red Cross gave me dry clothes and a blanket. That first night I cried so hard I thought my chest would crack. You think you're strong until you watch 40 years of your life dissolve in muddy water. The next morning, I called Samantha. She answered on the third ring, her voice light and cheerful, like she hadn't even noticed the storm. When I told her what happened, she gasped and said, "Of course I could stay with them until I figured things out." She said, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of you." I wanted to believe her. I really did. When I got to their house, she hugged me at the door and said how sorry she was. Brad shook my hand and gave me a stiff smile. He was always polite like that, but never warm. The first few days, they treated me like a guest. Samantha brought me tea and left fresh towels on the bed. Brad even helped me carry my bags up from the car. But little things started to change. The notes came first. Small slips of paper on the fridge about how much the electric bill had gone up or how much more they were spending on groceries now that I was there. Samantha never said anything directly, just kept leaving those notes and sighing whenever I asked if I could help with anything. Brad started staying later at work. At dinner, he barely spoke to me at all. I tried to stay out of the way. I kept my room clean, did my own laundry, even started buying my own groceries to keep in the back of their pantry. But nothing seemed to make a difference. Brad left one note that just said this isn't working anymore and underlined it twice. Samantha didn't look me in the eye when I asked her what he meant. She just said he was stressed about work and the baby and everything. I laid awake that night, staring at the ceiling. I thought about all the years I'd taken care of her, when she was sick, helped her with Emma, when Brad worked late, drove over to fix things around her house when they broke. I thought about how quickly I'd gone from mother to guest, and from guest to burden. The next morning, I packed my things while they were still asleep. I moved quietly so I wouldn't wake Emma. I didn't want her to see me leaving. I left a little note of my own on the kitchen counter. It just said, "Thank you for everything." I thought about adding more, but couldn't bring myself to. As I carried my bags to the car, the sun was just coming up. The air was cold and sharp. I could hear the baby crying faintly from upstairs. Samantha never came down. I started the engine and didn't look back. That's the thing about losing everything. After the flood, I thought the worst was over. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize your own child would rather see you sleep in a car than deal with the inconvenience of keeping you close. That kind of loss doesn't show up in the headlines. It doesn't get written down in the insurance claim. It just sits there in your chest, heavy and quiet, and waits for you to notice it's never going away. Even now, I wonder if she stood at the window that morning and watched me drive off. Part of me hopes she did. Part of me hopes she saw what she'd done and felt even a flicker of shame. But knowing Samantha, she probably just poured herself another cup of coffee, fed Emma her oatmeal, and went back to pretending nothing had changed. The first night in the car was the hardest. I parked behind a shuttered grocery store where no one would notice me and folded down the back seats as best I could. The cold settled into my bones faster than I expected, and even with 2 blankets and my coat, I couldn't stop shivering. Every sound outside made me jump: the scrape of wind across the lot, the occasional car passing on the main road. I lay there staring at the ceiling of the Ford, trying to convince myself this was only temporary, that surely someone would come through for me soon. But no one came. Days turned into weeks and then into months. I fell into a quiet routine of driving to the library in the morning, keeping warm during the day, and returning to my corner of the lot each night. Nobody paid me much attention. To the world, I was invisible, just another old woman shuffling through life with nowhere to go. That hurt more than I ever thought it would, realizing how easy it was for people to stop seeing you when you had nothing left to offer. The nights were the worst. The heater worked for maybe 10 minutes at a time before sputtering out, and every breath I took left a little circle of fog on the window. I'd wake up with ice on my eyelashes, fingers stiff and numb, praying for the sun to come up. I kept a small stash of food in a bag next to me, peanut butter crackers, a few bottles of water. It was just enough to get by. Some nights, I'd scroll through my phone, though the battery never lasted long. Samantha's messages always came at the worst possible times, cheerful little updates about how busy she was with Emma, how the nursery was coming along for the new baby, how they'd found a bigger house they were thinking of putting an offer on. She always signed off with a quick "Hope you're doing okay, Mom." Not once did she ask where I was sleeping. Not once did she offer to let me come back, even for a few nights. I can still feel the sting of reading those words while I sat there in the dark, curled up in the back seat with my knees to my chest. It was like I didn't even exist to her anymore, like the years I'd spent raising her, loving her, sacrificing for her didn't matter. I was just some minor inconvenience she could push aside with a polite text. The loneliness settled over me like another layer of frost. During the day, I'd watch other women my age laughing over coffee, holding hands with grandchildren, walking into warm houses with holiday lights on the porch. I'd sit in my car and wonder what I'd done wrong, how I'd become so disposable. The quiet ate at me, filling every corner of the car until even the sound of my own breathing felt too loud. By the second month, I stopped answering her texts. I couldn't bear the bright, happy tone, the way she talked about her life, as though I'd never even been a part of it. I wanted to scream every time I saw her name light up my phone, but I never did. I just silenced it, stared at the ceiling, and reminded myself that she had chosen this. She had decided I wasn't worth making room for. Sometimes I'd wonder if she thought of me at all, if she ever pictured me sitting alone in the car while she planned paint colors for her new kitchen. But deep down, I knew the truth. She didn't. She had her husband, her kids, her perfect little life. And me, I was nothing more than an afterthought, a name at the bottom of her contact list, someone she could tell herself she'd helped for a while before moving on. It's a strange kind of heartbreak, being alive and yet feeling like you've already been erased. Some nights, I'd press my hand to the window and watch the faint glow of lights in the distance, wondering what it would feel like to be welcome somewhere, to be missed. But that welcome never came. All I had was the bitter taste of knowing how quickly love can turn into obligation and how easily obligation can turn into indifference. That was the hardest part. Not the cold or the hunger or even the loneliness. The hardest part was realizing that to her I didn't matter anymore. Every morning I drove to the library as soon as it opened. It became my ritual, something to keep me moving through the long gray days. I'd park in the same spot near the back entrance, gathering my bag and tucking my scarf tighter before walking inside. The warmth hit me the second the doors closed behind me, and for just a moment, I could pretend I had somewhere to belong. The library was quiet at that hour. The hum of computers and the faint rustle of newspapers were the only sounds. I always headed straight to the row of public terminals, slipping into the same chair by the window. My fingers would ache from the cold as I typed out yet another job application, searching through listings that seemed to shrink every week. I looked up housing assistance programs called numbers that never called me back, filled out forms that led nowhere. There was something comforting about the routine, though. Even though nothing ever came of it, at least I was trying. I told myself that counted for something. It kept me from sinking into the kind of despair that had started to feel too close for comfort. Rosa was the librarian on the morning shift. She was maybe in her late 50s with kind eyes and hair she pinned up in neat twists. She never asked me any questions, but I could tell she knew. She'd stopped giving me the 2-hour warnings on the computers after a few weeks. Sometimes she'd leave a cup of tea on the corner of my desk without a word or a wrapped muffin from the vending machine. I came to depend on her quiet kindness more than I could admit. She never pitied me, and she never made me feel ashamed. She just nodded when I walked in every morning like it was the most normal thing in the world. That little nod got me through more days than I could count. One Tuesday, everything changed. It started out the same as every other morning. I sat down, logged into my email, and began scrolling through the usual rejections and overdue notices. But one message stopped me cold. The subject line was just my name, followed by the words Estate of Evelyn Hartwell. For a long moment, I couldn't even click on it. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at the screen. Evelyn was my mother's older sister. I hadn't spoken to her in over 30 years. The last I'd heard, she was living somewhere out west, happy and childless, living a life none of us back in Ohio understood. When I finally opened the email, my eyes scanned the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. The message was from a law office in Pasadena informing me that I was the sole beneficiary of Evelyn's estate. They said she had passed away 6 months ago, and they'd been trying to locate me ever since. There was a phone number to call, a name to ask for, and a list of documents they would need me to sign. I read the message 3 times, then sat back in the chair, my hands trembling. The words didn't feel real. Estate, beneficiary, property, accounts. I reached for my bag and pulled out my phone, ready to call the number on the screen, but I stopped myself. What if it wasn't true? What if it was some kind of scam? People like me didn't just inherit things. People like me lived in their cars and drank tea in libraries and prayed for another day to scrape by. But then I thought of Evelyn, how she used to send me postcards when I was little. Pictures of palm trees and beaches, notes in her neat cursive that always signed off with love. How she'd stopped writing after my mother made it clear she didn't approve of Evelyn's life. It made a strange kind of sense that Evelyn, of all people, would remember me. I glanced up and caught Rosa watching me from the desk. She tilted her head, her eyebrows raised just slightly in a silent question. I shook my head, though my lips had already started to curl into a shaky smile. Because deep down I knew. For the first time in months, I felt the smallest spark of something I hadn't felt in so long it was almost unrecognizable. Hope. And sitting there, in that hard plastic chair, surrounded by strangers and whispers, and the faint smell of old books, I let myself believe it might actually be true. My life might be about to change. The flight to California felt like stepping into someone else's story. I sat by the window and watched the Ohio snow disappear beneath me, replaced by endless stretches of sky. My hands gripped the armrest almost the whole way, as though if I let go, I might wake up back in the library, staring at that email like it was some kind of cruel mistake. But the moment the plane dipped through the clouds and the mountains came into view, something shifted. The light was different here. Softer, warmer, as though even the sun knew how to be kinder. My chest loosened for the first time in months when I stepped off the plane into the California air. It smelled faintly of flowers and something sweet I couldn't name. The driver who met me at the curb held a sign with my name, and when he took my bag and opened the door of the car, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The ride to Pasadena passed in a blur. I watched palm trees rush by outside the window, their fronds swaying like they didn't have a care in the world. The houses we passed got prettier the closer we came to Evelyn's street. Colorful bungalows lined the quiet roads, each one unique, each one loved. And then the car stopped in front of hers. I knew it was hers before the driver even said a word. A soft yellow Craftsman with white trim and a wide front porch that wrapped around the corner. The yard was small, but neat a few orange trees heavy with fruit standing sentry by the walkway. I climbed out of the car, my knees trembling, and took my first steps toward the house. Up close, the details revealed themselves. The woodwork around the windows was painted the same creamy white as the porch railing, and climbing roses framed the doorway. The house seemed to exhale warmth, as though it had been waiting for me all this time. The lawyer was already there when I arrived. He smiled politely and handed me the keys without ceremony. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Sunlight poured through the windows and painted golden rectangles on the hardwood floors. The living room was filled with soft chairs and shelves lined with novels and photographs. In one of them, Evelyn stood with another woman, their hands entwined, both of them smiling in a way that was almost shy. Her name was Patricia. The lawyer explained later that they had shared this house, this life, for almost 4 decades. That love was in every corner of the place. The kitchen walls were hung with copper pots and pans polished to a shine. A collection of teacups stood neatly behind glass cabinet doors. The bedroom held a quilt, folded at the foot of the bed, stitched with the kind of care you only give to someone you truly love. I walked through each room, slowly letting my fingers brush against the worn banisters and polished tabletops. Every inch of the house felt alive. I could almost hear their laughter in the garden outside, see them standing side by side in the kitchen making dinner together. It didn't feel like a stranger's house. It felt like home. That night, I stayed at a little motel down the street, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the house, about how it seemed to recognize me somehow, to welcome me, even though I didn't think I deserved it. Lying there staring at the ceiling, I decided I would not waste this chance. I would not let anyone make me feel small again. The next morning, I walked back to the house alone. The neighborhood was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of a lawnmower. I climbed the steps and unlocked the door, pushing it open with a kind of reverence. Sunlight spilled across the living room as I stood there, breathing it all in. I thought of Samantha then. I thought of her casual texts, her polite excuses, her husband's sharp little notes about the cost of keeping me around. I thought of all the nights I spent in the car praying just to wake up in the morning. I thought of how easily she had decided I didn't matter. And standing there in Evelyn's living room, I felt something settle in me. Something solid. I wasn't going back. I would never again let someone treat me like a burden. This house, this life Evelyn had given me, was proof that I was worth more than scraps of attention and whispered apologies. I walked into the kitchen and opened the windows, letting the morning air rush in. The orange trees outside swayed gently in the breeze, and I could almost hear Evelyn's voice, quiet but sure, telling me I was finally home. That afternoon, I bought flowers from a little shop down the block and put them in a vase on the dining table. I sat in one of the soft chairs by the window and watched the sun dip behind the mountains, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like peace. I knew I still had a lot to figure out, but I also knew this: I would never again let anyone make me feel invisible. And if Samantha or anyone else wanted to find me, they would have to come here. On my terms. Because I wasn't running anymore. I was finally standing still, right where I belonged. The first call came less than a week after I signed the final papers. I saw Samantha's name light up my phone, and for a moment my breath caught in my chest. For the briefest second, I wondered if maybe she was calling because she'd been thinking about me. Maybe she missed her mother and wanted to make things right. But as soon as I picked up, her voice was bright and sugary, the kind of sweet that left a bitter taste. She asked how I was doing, said she'd been so worried about me that she hadn't heard from me in weeks. I could hear Brad's voice in the background, low and impatient, and I pictured him pacing behind her. She went on and on about the baby, about Emma, about how expensive everything was these days, and how much easier things were when families stuck together. At first, she pretended not to know much about the inheritance, only mentioning how word got around so fast in small towns. But it didn't take long for her to start dropping little hints. She said how the market was so competitive now, how she and Brad were just a little shy of what they needed for the down payment on the perfect house. She said how wonderful it would be if I came home, how much Emma missed me, how much help I'd be. I didn't say much. I let her talk, her words spilling over each other, trying to make it all sound casual. But underneath it all, I could hear the desperation, the calculation in every sentence. When she finally stopped to take a breath, I told her I was fine where I was and that I had a lot to figure out. She hesitated then, like she hadn't expected me to push back. Then she plastered that bright tone back on and told me she'd call again soon. And she did. Every other day for 2 weeks, her voice growing sharper each time I didn't say what she wanted to hear. By the 4th call, she was already talking about flights, about how she and Brad could come out to see me and help me settle in. I told her she was welcome to visit, but in my mind, I already knew exactly what they were coming for. The day they arrived, the California sun was warm and golden, and I stood on the porch waiting as their rental car pulled up. Samantha stepped out first, dressed in a crisp blouse and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Brad followed close behind, carrying a small suitcase in one hand and glancing at the house with obvious interest. They both hugged me like nothing had ever happened, like I hadn't spent 3 months sleeping in my car while they went about their lives. Samantha's voice was bright and gushing as she told me how beautiful the house was, how happy she was for me, how proud she was. Brad's handshake was firm, but his eyes were already roaming over the front porch, the garden, the windows. I invited them in, keeping my tone polite but cool. They walked through the rooms like buyers at an open house, making little comments about how spacious it all was, how much work it must take to keep it up. Samantha even went so far as to say it was too much for one person, that I must get lonely rattling around by myself in such a big place. I just smiled and let them talk. When we sat down for coffee in the kitchen, Brad finally got to the point. He leaned forward and started talking numbers, laying it all out like it was just good sense. He said how much better it would be for the family if I helped them buy their forever home, how they'd pay me back, how it was really an investment in the grandchildren's future. I sipped my coffee and let them go on their words, tripping over each other, their greed so obvious now I wondered how I'd ever missed it. I didn't raise my voice, didn't let them see how much it hurt to hear them talk about me like a wallet instead of a mother. Instead, I sat there calm and quiet, my back straight, my hands steady. When they finally stopped, I thanked them for coming and told them it was nice to see them. Then I excused myself and stepped out onto the porch, leaving them sitting at the table in silence. I could feel their eyes on me through the window, but I didn't turn around, because I'd already decided they could beg and flatter and plan all they wanted. But I was done letting them treat me like I didn't matter. I was done letting anyone make me feel like less than who I was. I'd spent enough of my life invisible. Now it was my turn to be seen. That evening, we met at a restaurant downtown, one of those sleek, expensive places where the waiters speak in soft voices and the plates are more art than food. Samantha had dressed up, her smile fixed and bright under the dim light. Brad sat next to her, his shoulders square, his tie knotted just right, the picture of self-importance. I ordered coffee while they both ordered wine, and for a while, we just exchanged pleasantries. Samantha talked about Emma and the baby on the way. Brad talked about his promotion. But I could feel it coming. Every word they said felt like they were circling something, waiting for the right moment to strike. Halfway through the meal, Brad cleared his throat and leaned forward, his voice low and serious. He started talking about family and opportunity and how rare it was to get ahead these days. He said they'd found the perfect house, but needed just a little help with the down payment. $60,000, he said, like it was nothing at all. His eyes were sharp on me, as if daring me to say no. I set down my fork and folded my hands in my lap. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Samantha jumped in to fill the silence, her tone sweet and pleading. She said it would mean so much to the kids, to the family, and that they'd pay me back as soon as they could. She said she knew I wouldn't say no, not to my own grandchildren. That was when I finally spoke. I reminded them of the nights I spent in the back of my car freezing under a thin blanket while they slept warm and safe in their beds. I reminded them of the little notes Brad left on the refrigerator and the way Samantha avoided my eyes when I told her I was leaving. I told them how it felt to realize I was nothing more than an inconvenience to them, someone they tolerated out of obligation until it became too much work. Samantha's smile faltered then, and she looked down at her plate. Brad started to say something, but I cut him off with a quiet shake of my head. I told them no. I told them I wouldn't give them a dime. And then I finished my coffee in silence while they sat there stunned. The next morning, they showed up at my door just before 9. I was already on the porch, sipping coffee in the soft morning sun. They didn't even bother with niceties this time. Samantha demanded to talk inside. Brad stood behind her, his arms crossed, his mouth a tight line. I stayed in my chair and told them no. Samantha's face reddened, and she stepped closer, her voice rising. She said I was being cruel. She said this wasn't the mother she knew. Brad called me selfish, said I was tearing the family apart. They went back and forth, their words sharper and louder, but I stayed where I was calm and steady, letting them wear themselves out. When they finally stopped, I stood and set my coffee cup down on the railing. I looked at them both, really looked at them, and said the words I'd been holding inside for months. I learned the difference between being loved and being useful. Samantha flinched like I'd struck her. Brad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I told them they needed to leave, that this house, this life was mine now, and that if they ever wanted to be a part of it again, they'd have to come with love, not demands. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. Through the window, I watched them stand there on the porch, unsure of what to do. For the first time in years, I felt tall. I felt whole. And I felt free. These days, my life feels quieter but fuller than it's been in years. I joined a little book club that meets every Thursday at the community center. The first time I walked through those doors, I half expected to feel out of place, but the women there welcomed me like I'd always belonged. We sit around a big round table, sipping tea and laughing over stories, some from the books and some from our own lives. Sharon is there, of course, with her easy smile and gentle way of making sure everyone feels heard. I've even started hosting now and then, laying out cookies on the dining table Evelyn once set for her own friends. I've made more friends in a few months here than I had back in Ohio in years. Neighbors stop by to drop off oranges from their trees or wave when they see me watering the garden. Some nights, I find myself lingering on the porch just to hear the hum of this little neighborhood settling into the evening. The air here feels like home. One morning I woke up and decided it was time to give something back. I met with my lawyer and started the paperwork for a scholarship fund. It's for women over 50 starting over after losing everything just like I did. Knowing that my struggle could help someone else find her feet again feels like the best kind of purpose. Evenings are my favorite part of the day now. I sit on the porch with a book in my lap and watch the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in pink and gold. Sometimes Sharon joins me, and we talk about nothing and everything, our words floating on the warm breeze. The quiet no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like peace. When I think about what I've learned through all of this, I don't feel angry anymore. I've learned that self-love is not selfish. It's necessary. I've learned that real kindness comes from people who expect nothing in return. And I've learned that setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting people out. It means showing yourself the respect you deserve. Looking back, I don't even recognize the woman who used to shrink herself to fit into other people's lives. She's gone now. In her place is someone who knows her worth, who can stand on her own 2 feet, who can sit on a porch at sunset and feel completely at home. This is my life now. And for the first time in a long time, it feels like it's really mine.